8979 заседание Совета Безопасности объявляется открытым. Предварительная повестка дня данного заседания гласит: письмо постоянного представителя Украины при Организации Объединенных Наций от 28 февраля 2014 года на имя председателя Совета Безопасности. С. 2014-136. Повестка дня утверждается. На основании правила 37 Временных правил процедуры Совета я приглашаю принять участие в данном заседании представителей Австралии, Австрии, Андорры, Антигуа и Барбуды, Багамских островов, Белиза, Бельгии, Болгарии, Боснии и Герцеговины, Ботсваны, Венгрии, Гватемалы, Германии, Греции, Грузии, Дании, Доминиканской Республики, Исландии, Испании, Италии, Канады, Кипра, Колумбии, Коста-Рики, Кувейта, Латвии, Либерии, Литвы, Лихтенштейна, Люксембурга, Мальты, Нигера, Нидерландов, Новой Зеландии, Панамы, Парагвая, Перу, Польши, Португалии, Федеративных Штатов Микронезии, Республики Молдовы, Республики Корея, Румынии, Самоа, Сингапура, Словакии, Словении, Тимора-Лешти, Тринидада и Тобаго, Турции, Украины, Фиджи, Финляндии, Черногории, Чешской Республики, Чили, Швейцарии, Швеции и Эквадора. Решение принимается. Сейчас Совет Безопасности приступит к рассмотрению пункта 2 повестки дня. На рассмотрении членов Совета находится документ С-2022-155, текст проекта резолюции, представленного Австралией, Австрией, Албанией, Андоррой, Антигуа и Барбудой, Багамскими островами, Белизом, Бельгией, Болгарией, Боснией и Герцеговиной, Ботсваной, Венгрией, Гватемалой, Германией, Грецией, Грузией, Данией, Доминиканской Республикой, Ирландией, Исландией, Испанией, Италией, Канадой, Кипром, Колумбией, Коста-Рикой, Кувейтом, Латвией, Либерией, Литвой, Лихтенштейном, Люксембургом, Мальтой, Нигером, Нидерландами, Новой Зеландией, Норвегией, Панамой, Парагваем, Перу, Польшей, Португалией, Федеративными Штатами Микронезии, Республикой Молдовой, Республикой Корея, Румынией, Самоа, Сингапуром, Словакией, Словенией, Соединенным Королевством Великобритании и Северной Ирландии, Соединенными Штатами Америки, Тимором-Лешти, Тринидадом и Тобаго, Турцией, Украиной, Фиджи, Финляндией, Францией, Черногорией, Чешской Республикой, Чили, Швейцарией, Швецией и Эквадором. Сейчас это у нас, а потом я даю слово, правильно? Сейчас я объявляю, а потом даю слово. Совет готов приступить к голосованию по проекту резолюции, находящемуся на его рассмотрении. Сейчас я предоставляю слово тем членам Совета, которые хотели бы выступить с заявлениями до голосования. Я предоставляю слово представителю Соединенных Штатов.
Colleagues, we are here today because of Russia's unprovoked, unjustified, unconscionable war on Ukraine. Let us never forget that this is a war of choice, Russia's choice. Russia chose to invade its neighbor. Russia chose to inflict untold suffering on the Ukrainian people and on its own citizens. Russia chose to violate Ukraine's sovereignty, to violate international law, to violate the UN Charter. Now, all across Ukraine, people are fleeing for their lives. Residents of Kyiv and Kharkiv have left their homes with only the belongings they could stuff in their backpacks to make shelter in subway stations, which have now become bomb shelters. We've seen reports of attacks on kindergartens and orphanages. Babies, newborn babies in an intensive care unit have been evacuated into makeshift bomb shelters too. We have seen heart-wrenching images of fathers sobbing as they say goodbye to their young children and sending their families away as they send their families away to safety while they stay behind to defend their country. In Kyiv today, thousands of people crushed into a local train station with mothers passing their children over the crowd, begging for people to help to get their babies onto trains and to safety. According to the UN High Commissioner for Refugees, more than 50,000 people have fled Ukraine in less than 48 hours. We've also seen everyday Russians bravely speak out and demonstrate in cities across Russia against President Putin's decision to plunge them into a war with their neighbor. They do not want to sacrifice Russian lives for Putin's ambition. This body, charged with maintaining international peace and security, was created to prevent exactly this kind of aggression from ever happening again. Russia's latest attack on our most fundamental principles is so bold, so brazen, that it threatens our international system as we know it. We have a solemn obligation to not look away. We believe to our core that the noble intentions of this institution should still have a place in solving 21st century problems and shielding our children and our grandchildren from the horrors of war. The horrors of war are exactly what our Ukrainian brothers and sisters are experiencing today. The people of Ukraine will soon need food and water and shelter and medical aid. They will face displacement and lose everything they've worked to build. For these reasons, we and Albania, in consultation with our allies and partners, have proposed this draft resolution holding Russia to account for its aggression against Ukraine. This resolution condemns Russia's aggression. It reaffirms the sovereignty, independence, unity, and territorial integrity of Ukraine. And it demands the Russian Federation to immediately, completely, and unconditionally withdraw its forces. It also calls for the facilitation of rapid, safe, and unhindered humanitarian assistance to those in need in Ukraine and the protection of civilians, including those who are humanitarian personnel. Today, we are taking a principled stand against Russia's aggression in this council, but many of us are taking actions in our capitals to defend international law, including the UN Charter, and to impose severe consequences on Russia for its invasion of Ukraine. In coordination with our allies and partners, we are imposing severe and immediate economic costs on Russia. These measures include sweeping financial sanctions that will have an immediate impact on its economy and export controls that will cut off Russia's access to vital technological inputs, atrophy its industrial base, and undercut Russia's strategic ambitions to exert influence on the world stage. In addition, President Biden will be sanctioning President Putin himself, along with Foreign Minister Lavrov and members of Russia's national security team. These actions are meant to complement the important work we're doing in the Security Council and the resolution we have put forward today. History will judge us for our actions or lack thereof. And so long as we have a Security Council, I believe we ought to strive to ensure it lives up to the highest purposes to prevent conflict and avert unnecessary war. Russia has already subverted that mission, but at a minimum, at the very minimum, the rest of us have an obligation to object and to stand up for the UN Charter. To those who say all parties are culpable, I say that is a clear cop-out. One country is invading another. Russia is the aggressor here. There is no middle ground. Any doubters, I say, look at the kindergarten that was bombed this morning. Take a hard look. To those who say there is a special history between Russia and Ukraine that somehow excuses the war, I say we should all think carefully who that label might apply to next. And as I said on Monday night, President Putin asserted that Russia has a rightful claim to all territories from the Russian Empire. And just a few hours ago, Russia threatened Finland and Sweden with military and political repercussions. Responsible member states do not invade their neighbors. They do not commit violence against their neighbors just because they have the ability to do so. That is the entire purpose of our international system. That is fundamentally the point of the Security Council and the United Nations. So, colleagues, this is a simple vote today. Let me put it plainly. Vote yes if you believe in upholding the UN Charter. Vote yes if you support Ukraine's or any state's right to sovereignty and territorial integrity. Vote yes if you believe Russia should be held to account for its actions. Vote no or abstain if you do not uphold the Charter and align yourselves with the aggressive and unprovoked actions of Russia. Just as Russia had a choice, so do you. Thank you.
Спасибо. Сейчас я предоставляю слово представителю Албании.
Let me start by stating that my delegation subscribes to what we just heard from the Ambassador of the United States. Dear colleagues, we are called today to express clearly and loudly where we, our states, stand individually and collectively with respect to international law that we have agreed to, with the principles enshrined in the UN Charter that we have agreed to, with the international norms we have commonly established to govern our relations as independent and sovereign countries, as peace-loving nations, as responsible international actors. As we speak, Ukraine is being bombed, people are being killed, a country in Europe is being destroyed by a more powerful country, its neighbor, that has decided it wants to turn the historic clock backwards. A prominent member of the Security Council to whom the world has given power and trust to decide on peace and security. Instead, that country has decided to rule and inflict death. With its unprovoked aggression, Russia is not only inflicting untold pain and causing an unprecedented humanitarian situation in Europe, it has stained the UN Charter with innocent blood. It is burying the Charter under the rubble of destruction in Kiev and other cities in Ukraine. We must say no, and it is not too late to stop this madness. Dear colleagues, the resolution I have presented condemns Russia's actions, underscores that Russia must immediately cease its use of force against Ukraine and withdraw its forces. It calls upon Russia to abide by the Minsk agreements. It also calls for facilitation of humanitarian assistance to those in need in Ukraine, and their number is growing by the hour, and urges continuous efforts to respond to the humanitarian and refugee crisis that Russia's aggression has created. The resolution echoes the call of the Secretary General addressed publicly to President Putin that in the name of humanity, bring your troops back to Russia. It echoes numerous similar calls at the highest level around the globe to stop war. This is the minimum we can do. We owe it to Ukraine, a member of the United Nations, to its people, to the world. Dear colleagues, this is a defining moment for the Council, and not only. This is a day that will be long remembered on one single aspect, and our children, the future generations, will know who stood up for respect of human life, for international law, for rules, for solidarity with Ukraine, so that children, young girls, women and men, just human beings, live their life free, in peace and in dignity. And who did not? This is not a moment to look away. This is a moment to speak, and we call on the members of the Council to support the text so that we say no to aggression, we say no to an unprovoked war, we say no to the domination of a country by a more powerful one. And I thank you.
Спасибо. Сейчас я предоставляю слово представителю Соединенного Королевства.
Thank you. The UN Charter begins with a solemn invocation to peace. We, the peoples of the United Nations, determined to save successive generations from the scourge of war. That conviction has been the touchstone of the work in this chamber since 1945. We must not forget that our fundamental purpose here is to protect people and their futures, to protect people from violence and conflict that destroys lives. As we speak, women and children in Kyiv, young families in Odessa, pensioners in Kharkiv, and civilians all over Ukraine are sheltering from Russia's military onslaught. First, Russia claimed this was all Western hysteria. Then they said it was about Donetsk and Luhansk. Now they are bombing Kiev. We have seen dreadful images of Russian tanks crushing civilians in the Ukrainian capital. A country of 44 million people is being attacked on all fronts. Colleagues, on today is a message to those people that the world is on your side and stands with the Ukrainian people. It's a message to the world that the rules we built together must be defended, because otherwise, who might be next? It's a message to Russia as well, to the brave Russian citizens who are protesting a war they do not want. This resolution demands an end to this war. Colleagues, President Putin has launched a massive invasion of Ukraine. His aim is to remove people. No fog of war is thick enough to obscure a truth this clear. This is not self-defence under Article 51. It is naked aggression. It is an unprovoked, unjustified war, and this Council must condemn it. Thank you.
Спасибо. Сейчас я предоставляю слово представителю Габона.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Monsieur le Président, ce Conseil se trouve aujourd'hui face à ses responsabilités, dans sa capacité de réaffirmer les principes fondamentaux qui sous-tendent son existence. Les Nations Unies ont été créées au sortir d'une guerre sanglante, dans l'objectif principal de prévenir et d'empêcher toute autre belligérance meurtrière. Aujourd'hui, alors que plusieurs nations et peuples du monde peinent encore à exorciser les stigmates des guerres lointaines, pendant que l'humanité cherche des réponses concrètes contre les vulnérabilités et fragilités multiples qui le menacent, nous n'avons pas besoin ni de guerre, ni de nouvelles peurs. La guerre est la négation des aspirations des peuples du monde. La guerre sème la mort et la destruction. Ces dévastations et traumatismes sont terribles et souvent irréparables. La guerre n'a jamais de réel vainqueur, mais ravive l'atrocité des douleurs en rendant chronique le cycle infernal des rancœurs. Chers collègues, parce que mon pays est attaché à la paix et aux principes qui fondent la Charte des Nations Unies, parce que mon pays milite pour un ordre international plus juste, fondé sur les règles, il va condamner aujourd'hui la guerre contre un membre des États des Nations Unies. Mon pays joindra sa voix à toutes celles qui aujourd'hui condamneront la guerre, avec l'espoir que notre élan de réaffirmation des principes de la Charte des Nations Unies ne sera plus jamais à géométrie variable et que les principes sur lesquels se fonde notre position aujourd'hui seront toujours défendus avec la même force et la même vigueur partout où ils auront à être bafoués. Chers collègues, la communauté internationale se doit de saisir ce momentum pour une autocritique sans concession et s'interdire partout dans le monde toute guerre de choix, toute guerre d'influence, toute guerre d'hégémonie, toute guerre de prédation de ressources, toute guerre injuste et déshumanisante. La scène internationale ne doit pas refléter l'image d'une jungle dans laquelle les nations sont soit chasseurs, soit chassés. Monsieur le Président, pour terminer, nous voulons réitérer notre appel à un cessez-le-feu immédiat et à la désescalade. Nous demandons aux belligérants de ne pas entraver l'accès de l'aide humanitaire aux populations qui en ont besoin. Nous appelons l'ensemble des parties à renouer le fil du dialogue et à privilégier le règlement pacifique de leurs différends. Quant à nous, chers collègues, membres du Conseil de sécurité, les responsabilités que nous avons à prendre aujourd'hui et chaque fois doivent se traduire par la défense, la réaffirmation et le renouvellement de nos engagements souscrits il y a 77 ans, ceux de préserver les générations présentes et futures du fléau de la guerre. Je vous remercie, Monsieur le Président.
Спасибо. Сейчас я предоставляю слово представителю Мексики.
Muchas gracias, señor presidente. México votará en favor del proyecto de resolución presentado por Albania y los Estados Unidos por las razones que expondré a continuación. Primero, estamos ante la invasión de un país soberano por parte de otro, lo que representa una flagrante violación al artículo 2, párrafo 4 de la Carta de la ONU y constituye, además, una agresión en los términos de la resolución 3314 de la Asamblea General, adoptada por todos los miembros de las Naciones Unidas. Segundo, México ha sufrido en carne propia 4 invasiones a lo largo de su historia como Estado independiente. 2 por parte de Francia y 2 por parte de los Estados Unidos. La primera intervención de los Estados Unidos en 1846 derivó en la pérdida de casi la mitad de nuestro territorio nacional de entonces. Tercero, México ha condenado siempre todo acto de agresión, como dejó constancia con su protesta en la Sociedad de Naciones por la anexión de Etiopía y Albania por parte de Italia y la anexión de Austria por parte de Alemania. Cuarto, nuestro repudio al uso de la fuerza nos llevó a convocar en 1945 la Conferencia Interamericana sobre los Problemas de la Paz y de la Guerra en la Ciudad de México, para llegar a la Conferencia de San Francisco con una posición regional clara y definida en torno a este tema. Quinto, la política exterior de México es pacifista. Desde que se fundó la ONU, mi país ha defendido y defenderá ante esta organización y en todos los foros la proscripción de la amenaza o el uso de la fuerza en las relaciones internacionales. Sexto, en 1988 inscribimos en nuestra Constitución los principios de la Carta de las Naciones Unidas como principios normativos de nuestra política exterior. Por lo anteriormente expuesto, México condena los actos de agresión perpetrados por la Federación de Rusia en contra de Ucrania. Llamamos a las partes al cese inmediato de las hostilidades. Reconocemos la soberanía, la independencia política y la integridad territorial de Ucrania y respaldamos los esfuerzos del secretario general de la ONU en la búsqueda de una solución diplomática para evitar que avance el sufrimiento de la población civil. Señor presidente, como resultado de nuestra experiencia histórica y por mandato constitucional, México apoyará el proyecto de resolución que nos ocupa. Muchas gracias.
Спасибо. Сейчас я предоставляю слово представителю Бразилии.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, we live in unprecedented circumstances of threat to the international order and a violation of the UN Charter. We are gravely concerned with the Russian military operations against targets in sovereign Ukrainian territory. We believe the Security Council should strive to show a united resolve in pursuing diplomatic solutions to all threats to international peace and security, and seek agreement also on the Ukrainian crisis. As we hear reports of increasing civilian casualties, fear and devastation in Ukraine, a scenario that any war inevitably generates, our main objective now is to immediately stop ongoing hostilities. How should we do that? First, the Security Council must swiftly react to the use of force against the territorial integrity of a member state. A line has been crossed, and this Council cannot remain silent. Secondly, and no less important, we need to create the conditions for dialogue among all involved parties. The world cannot afford a point of no return where parties see military victory as the only avenue to end conflict. During the negotiations of the text, Brazil attempted to seek this balance. To maintain the space for dialogue, while still signaling that the use of force against the territorial integrity of a member state is not acceptable in the world today. We are also deeply concerned with Russia's decision to engage troops in military operations on the ground and with the loss of lives and danger to the civilian population that may ensue. We continue to hold a firm conviction that threats and force will not lead this crisis to a lasting settlement. Military action will inflict damage, undermine the faith in international law, and put the lives of millions of people into jeopardy. The mission of the Security Council is not over. If our efforts have so far failed to prevent a war, it is our duty to persevere and seek the immediate suspension of hostilities. We should strive to find ways to restore peace to Ukraine and the whole region. We renew our appeal for the full cessation of hostilities, for the withdrawal of troops, and for the immediate resumption of diplomatic dialogue. There is no alternative to negotiation to solve the present crisis. The security concerns voiced by the Russian Federation in the past few years, particularly regarding the strategic balance in Europe, do not give Russia the right to threaten the territorial integrity and sovereignty of another state. The Security Council has a legitimacy to debate and, with the goodwill of all, adopt measures to redress this dangerous situation. The collective security system of the United Nations rests ultimately on the pillar of international law. The sovereign equality and the territorial integrity of UN member states are not hollow words. It is our duty to give concrete meaning to the high aspirations of the drafters of the UN Charter. That is our most valuable legacy. To rid ourselves from the scourge of war was the very reason for the establishment of the United Nations. In the end, peace and international order must prevail. We shall not rest until this mission is accomplished. I thank you, Mr. President.
Спасибо. Сейчас я поставлю данный проект резолюции на голосование. Прошу голосующих за проект резолюции, содержащийся в документе С-2022-155, поднять руку. Кто против? Кто воздержался? Результаты голосования следующие. 11 голосов за, 1 голос против, 3 воздержалось. Проект резолюции не принимается, поскольку против него проголосовал постоянный член Совета Безопасности. Сейчас я предоставляю слово тем членам Совета, которые хотели бы выступить с заявлениями после голосования. Я предоставляю слово представителю Албании.
Dear colleagues, we deeply regret the decision of the Russian Federation to veto the resolution. The Council lost a precious opportunity to show to the world its unity, its power, its usefulness. Instead, it was blocked, it was taken hostage. We are disappointed but not surprised, and this is not the end of our efforts. We will continue to work with the UN member states, with those who stand for rules and not chaos, with those who base their relations with others on respect and not contempt. We will continue to condemn this aggression, call for ending this senseless war. Russia may inflict damage, kill people, overthrow a legitimate government, try to destroy Ukraine, but as history teaches, it will never be able to kill freedom. Instead, Russia will be held responsible for the consequences of its actions. It is already facing worldwide condemnation. It will face sanctions, as we heard, and restrictions, just like the suspension of its rights in the Council of Europe today. But it will not be able to destroy European security, nor will it be able to throw the world back. We stand and will stand with Ukraine. And as announced today by Prime Minister Rama, Albania, in its tradition, is ready, if needed, to shelter Ukrainians fleeing the war. In conclusion, let me reiterate that Albania supports the sovereignty, territorial integrity of Ukraine within its internationally recognized borders. And I thank you.
Спасибо. Сейчас предоставляю слово представителю Соединенных Штатов.
Colleagues, not surprisingly, Russia exercised unprovoked, unjustified, and unconscionable war in Ukraine. But let me make one thing clear. Russia, you cannot veto this resolution. You can veto this resolution, but you cannot veto our voices. You cannot veto the truth. You cannot veto our principles. You cannot veto the Ukrainian people. You cannot veto the UN Charter. And you will not veto accountability. Responsible members of this Security Council have stood together today in the face of Russia's aggression, and we will continue to stand with Ukraine, supporting it in every way we can. We are united behind Ukraine and its people. Despite a reckless, irresponsible permanent member of the Security Council abusing its power to attack its neighbor and subvert the UN and our international system. This vote showed which countries truly believe in supporting the core principles of the UN and which ones deploy them as convenient catchphrases. This vote showed which Security Council members support the UN Charter and which ones do not. We will be addressing this matter in the General Assembly, where the Russian veto does not apply, and the nations of the world can, will, and should hold Russia accountable and stand in solidarity with Ukraine. Before I conclude, I want to commend the true and tremendous courage we are seeing from the Ukrainian people. I want to thank the Ukrainian permanent representative who is here with us today. Earlier today, President Biden spoke with President Zelensky and personally commended people who are fighting to defend their country. He also conveyed ongoing economic, humanitarian, and security support being provided by the United States, as well as our continued effort to rally other countries to provide similar assistance. It's hard to imagine what it must feel like to see tanks rolling into your city, to see bombs dropped on your streets, to see soldiers storm your parks and your gardens. But in the face of all of this, everyday Ukrainian people are taking extraordinary actions to protect their children, to protect their country, to defend everything they hold dear. I also want to commend the courage of the thousands of people in Russia who are protesting Putin's war, despite grave risks. Our member states take their cue with more of our own. Thank you.
Спасибо. Сейчас я предоставляю слово представителю
Ukraine. We urge that all efforts are made for the immediate cessation of violence and hostilities to be arrived at the cost of. We are also deeply concerned about the welfare, including a large number of Indian students in Ukraine. The contemporary global order has been built on the UN Charter, international law, and respect for the sovereignty and territorial integrity of states. All member states need to honor these principles in finding a constructive way forward. Dialogue is the only answer to settling differences and disputes, however daunting that may appear at this moment. It is a matter of regret that the path of diplomacy was given up. We must return to it. For all these reasons, India has chosen to abstain on this resolution. I thank you.
Спасибо. Сейчас я предоставляю слово представителю Соединенного